بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Good morning, everybody. Um, as part of a project of making education in general and philosophical education in particular more accessible, I have decided to produce a series of short but condensed lectures on philosophy of science. Inshallah, if it turns out to be successful, we can grow that project into something broader and more substantive. The lecture today is on scientific concepts, which are the building blocks of science, and having better understanding of them is crucial for grasping how science operates. This lecture draws heavily on the work of Theodore Arabatzis, with minor changes here and there where I see fit. So, scientific concepts, for a start, are not static. They are dynamic. They play representational as well as heuristic roles in the acquisition of scientific knowledge. They represent entities, properties, and processes in nature. At the same time, they facilitate the investigation of these very entities, properties, and processes. The formation, development, and identity of scientific concepts are central issues in the epistemology of science. How concepts change over time raises some challenging questions about the rationality of scientific change and science's ability to approach truth. So, the key idea here is that scientific concepts function both as representational units and as tools of discovery. So, okay, in this lecture, I will be covering the nature and function of scientific concepts, what it means to possess a scientific concept, how concepts are represented, how we can study concepts, the epistemological issues that arise when considering conceptual change, and the distinction between concepts referring to manifest entities and concepts referring to hidden entities. Let's start with the nature and function of scientific concepts. Concepts are often thought of as mental representations of objects, properties, and processes. They are treated as theoretical constructs of cognitive psychology, helping to explain human abilities such as unifying and discriminating. Concepts are involved in core cognitive processes like perception, memory, classification, and inference. However, rather than focusing on concepts as hidden psychological entities, we will consider them as associated with public representations of objects, properties, and processes. These public representations include linguistics, mathematical, and diagrammatical forms found in textbooks, research articles, and reports. This approach allows us to study scientific concepts by examining the representations associated with them, such as atoms, cells, genes, electric charge, and electromagnetic wave. Now, scientific concepts play several epistemic roles in scientific practice. They structure observation, so they structure scientific observation and the reporting of experimental results. For example, physicists report the observation of cloud chamber tracks in terms of electrons, positrons, and muons. Second, they enable regularities and laws. So they enable the detection of regularities and empirical laws. The concept of positive and negative electricity facilitated the discovery of regularities in electrical phenomena. They guide experimental design. For example, the concept of electron guided experiments on the influence of magnetism on radiation. Fourth, they act in the classification of objects. So they are linked to the classification of objects. The formation of concepts like planet and fixed stars in the Ptolemaic astronomy was associated with a classification of the heavenly realm. Fifth, they enable inferences about objects they refer to. And sixth, they facilitate the solution of theoretical problems. So the concept of electron helped us in understanding electric conduction. And seventh, they enable explanation. They enable explanation of phenomenon via hidden entities in mechanisms. The concept of atom in the 19th century chemistry enabled the explanation of laws of definite and multiple proportions. What about possessing concepts? What does it mean to possess a scientific concept? It involves the ability to use the corresponding scientific term correctly for description, explanation, and problem-solving purposes. To use the term X correctly is to possess the concept of X. Now, there are various views in psychology and philosophy of how to possess a scientific concept. We have the classical view, which says that possessing a concept means knowing its definition. So we provide a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for membership of a concept in a group. We have the prototype view, which says that possessing a concept means knowing the typical or diagnostic properties of its referent. 3, we have the exemplar view, which says that possessing a concept means having a representation of exemplary instances of its reference. And 4, we have a theory view. Possessing a concept means commanding a full theory about its referent. While the classical view is considered deficient, there is no consensus regarding the other three possibilities. For our purpose, we'll adopt a pluralist account of concept possession. So someone who possesses a scientific concept can usually state salient properties of the concept's reference. And the mastery of a concept comes in degrees. It is crucial that concepts, whatever their underlying structure, are associated with public representation. This public nature of scientific concepts allows historians and philosophers of science to study them by examining the evolving representations, their use, and their relationship to other concepts. Now, we move to representing scientific concepts. The representations with concepts can be characterized by multidimensional schemata, such as those developed by philosopher Hilary Putnam and Nancy Nersessian. So Putnam's approach is widely known in philosophy of science, is a classic now. In the 1970s, Putnam identified the possession of a concept with the ability to use the corresponding word. He argued that this ability derives from knowing the stereotype associated with the word's referent. For natural kinds, the stereotype consists of standardized description of typical features, which act as criteria for recognition. These features aren't necessary and sufficient conditions. Putnam further articulated his theory of concept using a four-dimensional vector. So we have a syntactic marker, for example, a noun, a semantic marker, such as an animal, a stereotype feature, a description of a typical feature, and a description of the extension, what the concept refers to. And we also, so the semantic marker are central for the meaning of the word, forming a crucial part of classification and are qualitatively harder to revise. So let's take an example. The word water has the following vector. So we have the syntactic marker, a mass noun, and concrete. We have a semantic marker, natural kind, and liquid. We have a stereotype, such as colorless, transparent, and tasteless. And we have the extension, which is H2O. Now, the description of a term's extension distinguishes concepts from meanings. Concepts are internal, one might say, psychological entities, while meanings have an external, real-world component, according to Putnam. Two speakers may share the same concepts, but refer to different entities. Now, Putnam's twin Earth thought experiment is quite famous and illustrates this very point. So on twin Earth, water is not H2O, but a different substance. Call it X, Y, and Z. Putnam does that. It is indistinguishable from water under normal conditions. Thus, a speaker on Earth and a speaker on twin Earth, says Putnam, would associate the same concept with the term water while referring to different substances. So, Putnam's schemata or schema is useful for tracking the development of a concept and how they retain their identity despite change. The instability of the stereotype need not undermine the stability of the extension, according to Putnam. Now we move to Nersessian's approach. Nancy Nersessian proposed a more complex representation of concepts, arguing that classical view is at odds with the historical evolution of concepts. If concepts were captured by necessary and sufficient condition, any change in those conditions would imply that concepts are vacuous. Conceptual change, therefore, would be impossible. Instead, Nersessian suggests a two-dimensional meaning schema. So we have the width-wise, a summary of features of each instance, and lengthwise, summary of change over time. Now, these features are organized along 4 lines. We have what is called stuff, which includes the ontological status and reference. We have a function, which includes what it does. And we have a structure, which includes its mathematical structure. And we have causal power, which includes roughly the effects. Now, this multidimensional schema captures the complexity of concepts and allows us to track them both synchronic, or to track variations both synchronic and diachronic. Now, in the sciences, concepts are often embedded in conceptual frameworks, systems of interconnected concepts. For Aristotle, for example, in Aristotelian cosmology, the concept of planet was embedded in a geocentric framework, which included concepts like fixed stars, comet, etc. Similarly, in Newtonian physics, concepts such as mass, force, and acceleration and energy are all interrelated. Now, learning a concept like force requires us to understand the connection it has to other concepts. This holistic learning involves exposure to several concepts and their interconnectedness. So to capture this dimension, we need to add a column to Nersessian's schema, specifying the concept's location in its conceptual framework, creating a conceptual map. Also, the causal power column should include its operational dimension, namely the ways in which the concept is operationalized in the lab or in the field. In addition to studying the representations associated with scientific concepts, we also have to study concepts by tracking their use of the corresponding words. As Ian Hacking puts it, concepts are words in their sites. Understanding a concept requires a history of corresponding words in their sites, whether these sites are sentences, institutions, authority, or language. By tracking a scientific term like electron, we can study its emergence, its relations to other terms like atom, its domain of application, the electromagnetic phenomena, and its descriptive and explanatory uses. This reveals how concepts are formed, how they change, and how they are affected by their transfer to other domains. and we must follow the trajectory of concepts not only in their theoretical environment, but also in the observational, experimental, and measuring practices associated with them. These practices play a role in specifying the meaning of concepts. Observations and experiment guide the articulation of concepts by indicating the properties that the reference should have. For example, the articulation of the concept of electron was guided by experimental phenomena. Now, a focus on practices elucidates the process of conceptual change. Conceptual change can occur in three ways. We have new concepts are formed. These arise in response to empirical or theoretical problems. Empirical problems, such as the ordering of phenomena, often require new concepts. The detection of regularities in static electricity in the 18th century led to concept of positive and negative electricity. Theoretical problems such as explaining novel phenomena can also require new concepts of entities, properties, and processes. For example, new experimental discovery in magnetooptics and cathode rays led to the novel concept of the electron. 2. We have available concepts evolving. This occurs in responses to empirical and theoretical problems. Concepts may change due to new observations or experimental information. They may also change due to theoretical difficulties like incoherence within a theory. For instance, the concept of a planet changed dramatically during the Copernican revolution. Third, we have old concepts disappearing, and sometimes scientific concepts simply die out. Some would give examples such as phlogiston, or caloric, or ether. Now, conceptual evolution can happen in various ways. We can have expansion by incorporating new properties, such as the property of spin incorporated into the concept of electron, or contraction by shedding older properties. For example, electron orbits were dropped after the development of quantum mechanics. Representation change. So when the representation of a concept's reference changes, the atom as a structured entity versus an indivisible entity. So here the distinction between the philosophical view of the atom, for example, and the more scientific one. Altered relation. We have an altering relation between concepts in the theory of relativity. The concept that changed the relation between mass and energy. And we have function change. We have change in the function of a concept. So the ether function changed from a medium for electromagnetic radiation to a medium for gravitation. Now, as long as the term is used in connection with the same class of things, the corresponding concept can be considered the same, despite its evolution. However, the referent of a concept can shift. For example, the object falling under the concept of planet changed in the 16th century. And tracking the use of scientific terms enables us to track variations of the corresponding concepts. So the coining of a new term indicates the emergence of a new concept. A rearrangement of relations between terms signifies conceptual change, and shifts in application and extinction of a term marks conceptual discontinuity. Now, what about problems of conceptual change? Well, the historical variations of scientific concepts is widely accepted. Concepts vary. However, it raises two main philosophical issues. One pertaining to scientific rationality. If different scientists attach different concepts to a single term, communication may break down, and this would make rational resolution of scientific disputes impossible, what has been dubbed incommensurability. And we have the problem of scientific realism. Conceptual change can threaten a realist account of scientific progress. If concepts evolve and cease to refer to the same object, then the ontology of science would be in flux. So, to maintain its identity, the term associated with a concept should continue to be used in the same way, applied to the same situation, and refer to the same thing. The stable identity of concept is maintained through retention of core sets of properties and the continuity of its epistemic function. So we have emphasis on practice, not only on theory. Now, lastly, we have two kinds of scientific concepts. So concepts come in different variations. It is useful to distinguish between concepts referring to manifest entities and those referring to hidden entities. This is, in a way, similar to the distinction between observational and theoretical concept, but the two are not coextensive. For example, the theoretical concept harmonic oscillator refers to both observable and unobservable entities, and the concept of planet is theoretical, but refers to observable objects. So the key point here is that the manifest-hidden distinction is significant for understanding concept formation, use, and identity, as will be clear. So concepts of manifest entities are formed for descriptive and classificatory purposes via a process of abstraction based on similarities and differences between objects. This process involves grouping objects into classes and discriminating between different kinds of objects. The correct use of these concepts involve learning to which objects they apply. Their stable identity derives from the stability of classification in their domain of application. Now, this is the manifest entity concept. What about the hidden entity concept? Well, concept of hidden entities are formed for explanatory purposes. This is different from descriptive purposes. Via abductive reasoning. They explain regularities and laws via hidden entities and mechanisms. They are formed in response to theoretical and empirical problem situations. The concept of the electron was formed in response to empirical problems posed by cathode rays and theoretical difficulties in Maxwellian electrodynamics. The correct use of hidden entity concepts requires learning the theory in which they are embedded. Their identity over time in a cross space is a complex issue. So conceptual change differs between these two types of concepts. For manifest entities, change is associated with reclassification. For hidden entities, change is associated with change in their representational and/or reclassification of their effect. Sometimes a concept is replaced by another different one. And with the replacement, an example is the replacement of phlogiston with oxygen. Now, the manifest hidden distinction is also relevant for scientific rationality and scientific realism. Communication problems, as I said, are more, or did not say that. Communication problems are more traceable for manifest entities, obviously, as we have direct access to the individual objects classified by them. But for hidden entities, communication problems are more difficult to spot and resolve. As for realism, the problem for manifest concept is about the naturalness of the classification. It's often posed in the form of a question, is such and such a natural kind? While for hidden concepts, it is about the very existence of the entity represented. It is easier to tell when the reference of a manifest concept changes, while this is more difficult for hidden entities. So let us conclude. Scientific concepts are building blocks of scientific knowledge. They play representational and heuristic roles, more functional roles as well. They evolve over time in response to empirical and theoretical challenges, And we can study concepts through their associated public representations and by tracking their use or tracking the use of corresponding words. Understanding conceptual change is crucial for understanding the evolution of scientific knowledge. And lastly, distinguishing between manifest and hidden concept can help us to understand different forms of conceptual development.